Hi, I'm Jazz Tangcay, Senior Artisans Editor from Variety, and welcome to Variety FYC Fest, The Shortlist. Please welcome from the Shortlist documentary film To Kill a Tiger, director, writer, and producer Nisha Pahuja. Hi, Nisha.
Hi, Jazz. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And first of all, congratulations on being shortlisted and congratulations on telling this incredible story documentary film that was 8 years in the making, right?
8 years in the making. Yes, a
Woo.
really long, long journey for sure.
Talk a little bit about that journey and yeah, take us back as to how it got made.
Yeah. Oh God. So many years ago. So, it actually, I would say probably the starting point was in 2012 after the Delhi gang rape. I don't know if you remember that horrific incident of the young girl in Delhi who was raped on a bus and died from her injuries. And I think it was after that I started to feel that it was important to make a film about masculinity. My film before that had been about gender justice and women's rights in India, and I started to realize that really the issue, the thing that needed to be explored and the thing that needed to be studied was masculinity. And so I started developing this film that was going to look at masculinity in India, and I began to follow the work of the NGO that features in the film. There was an activist named Mahinder Kumar. So I started to film the work that he was doing, and he had started a gender sensitization program in the state of Jharkhand, working with men and boys in 30 villages. And over the course of filming with him and following, the process of his work, I met Ranjit and came across, the story of him and his daughter. And literally um, days after it happened, and I just began filming that story. And it was only once we got into the edit room, because I'd been filming other stories as well, and it was only really once we got into the edit room and realized after 2 years of editing that really we had two separate films. And so I did sort of this pivot, like after 2 years of editing, and then decided just to focus on Ranjit and his family, and I'm so glad I did.
Yeah. You're dealing with rape, trauma, the fact that, you know, his daughter, Kiran, she's 13 years old.
Yeah.
How do you approach the family gaining trust? Because there's so much that you're unpacking in this story, but trust is such a key thing in this film. Like, how did you get that?
It's really curious, right? Because when you make a doc, you spend months, you spend an inordinate amount of time building a relationship with the people that you're going to be filming with. And in this case, the process was actually inverted, because the first time I met Ranjit and his family was the scene in the film where Amit, the activist, is going to their home to meet them and to offer support and find out what happened. And because at the time the film that I was making was really focusing on the NGO and the activists, this was just this was just part of their work, and that's what I was just following what they were doing in the field. And I had no idea how far the story would go, how far the journey would go with the family, because I wasn't sure whether they were going to pursue the case and what was going to happen. But because because it was so clear early on that they were going to pursue justice, I just began to follow them. And so the process of trust really came over the course of filming, and I would spend hours sometimes just filming with them, just getting them used to the camera, and sometimes just go without the camera. But it took, I would say it took several months. It was a long process to gain their trust. And I know that there were times where I thought, this I'm never going to be in. there's that moment when you recognize as a filmmaker when someone is just themselves on camera, and they're not, they're not awkward. And with the family, I wasn't ever sure that was going to happen, so when it finally did, I was elated. And then of course it just became, in some ways, probably the most intimate film I've ever made.
Talk about, you're following all these the different subjects, but you're also filming within a community, and the Asian community is very, very tight knit, and yeah, like, and you're inside that community. Like, did you face any setback as far as, like, you're telling the story and it's not a pleasant one at that?
Uh, yeah. I mean, undoubtedly um, there was, continued resistance to us documenting what was essentially seen by the community as exposing their shame. You know, we were, by telling the story, we were bringing dishonor to the community. So there was a tremendous amount of resistance, and it also went up and down, right? Because there were times where we were able to film with the community, and they were very open on camera. I mean, we filmed also with the boys' fathers, right? Um, but I think what happened really was as as the case progressed and as it became more and more apparent to everyone that the family wasn't going to drop the charges, that they were going to, they were going to pursue justice in spite of the death threats that they had received. Um, the tension began to mount, and of course it sort of leads to that scene in the film where the villagers enter, and the crew is essentially, you know, threatened and told that we had to stop filming. So yeah, definitely resistance.
Yeah. I find it fascinating that it actually is not just a story about one family. It's actually a universal story. There's a universal theme there, especially when I think it's the DA says, or the defense attorney says, it's about how basically the girl is blamed. It's like how she dressed, how
Yeah,
she walked, and then, it's also expressed again at another point. Like, and the boys aren't to be blamed. Talk about capturing that, right? And the conversations you had about showing that aspect of it, of like, this is not just isolated. Like, we've heard that many times growing up. Like, be careful how you dress. Like,
yeah,
that
yes,
that aspect, yeah.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And I do think that's why, I do think that's why the film resonates for people. I mean, I think it resonates for a couple of different reasons. Um, one is just, everyone loves a David and Goliath story, right? Everyone loves a film and a story about the underdog. Someone who's facing obstacles and is persevering. I think it's so clear, obviously, that there is this at the center of it, even though it is such a horrific tale, at the center of it is love. It's this tremendous love that a father has for his child. It's pretty amazing. And then I think the other aspect is what you said. It's the fact that although this is a really, geographically, this is a very specific space and a very specific setting. It's a small village in India. The truth is that this is something that all girls and all women around the world, no matter where we are, this is such a familiar story for us. I mean, there is this sense, it's like we live in a way with this sort of perpetual fear and this kind of understanding, in a way that we move through the world not always safe, that our bodies are contested spaces, and they don't always belong to us, and people do feel that they can do what they want. There is male entitlement everywhere. So I think it's something that we all understand. So
Yeah. I love that. And you talk about the editing of it and how a lot of it came together in the edit. At what point did you decide to show her face? Because so many times, we see these stories and, you know, especially given her age, like,
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jazz, I mean, really, we didn't decide to show her face. She chose to, literally. I mean, what happened, and it makes perfect sense, because even as a 13-year-old, there was just defiance in her. She just grew up with tremendous pride. It's how she's been raised, right? And it has so much to do with the fact that she is so beloved, by her father, especially, which is so key, and her family, her parents supported her. So what happened was, I mean, because we took so long to make the film, because by the time we were done, she was an adult, she could actually make the decision. And we had, in the edit room, we had tried a number of different things to mask her identity, to kind of, blurring and animation. We even actually literally gave her a new face. Like, we worked with an actor to replace her face, which was fascinating and bizarre, but really beautiful also in a way. But everything felt to us like we were, like, two things. I mean, one, we were kind of obliterating her humanity. It was a strange kind of thing to, just an ethical thing. It just felt strange, right? It was like, here's this incredible young person who is defiant and should be celebrated, and then she asked if she could, she just asked if she could see the film. We approached her and her family with the idea of her coming forward, and they said her parents had no problem with it. Parents had no issue, and she said, "Well, let me see the film." And she watched the film, and as soon as she saw the film, she said, "Yes, absolutely." And then the next day, I called her to ask her about it. Like, why are you choosing to do this? And she said for her, it was this idea, like when she saw herself as a 13-year-old, she couldn't believe how brave she was and how courageous she was, and she felt that 13-year-old needed to be celebrated. So, yeah, yeah.
I love that. What an incredible story. Do you know what I mean?
It's
Because
amazing.
the film itself is so unflinching, right?
Yeah,
And then you hear something like that and you're like,
yeah,
it's so powerful and it
yeah,
speaks so much to her resilience, I think.
yeah,
Talk about some of the, talk about the cultural impact and like, as far as like you've got some great producers on board and what is being done to as far as like raising awareness and what can be done, like I guess the calls to action
yeah,
from making
yeah,
this.
yeah, for sure. There. I don't know if you know this, but right now we're working actually with an incredible organization called Equality Now, and they're global, and they essentially use the law to advocate for gender justice around the world. So we're working with them. We're doing something called an impact campaign, which we're starting to kind of develop. They're really incredible. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is I will take the film, obviously, to India. That's really, really important to me. And just also internationally, I think that for me there are two key areas in terms of impact that I hope the film can have. One is just the idea of encouraging other survivors to come forward and to seek justice, because these barriers to justice that exist for survivors don't just exist in India. They are actually all over the world. It's the same story. It's your fault. The insensitivity of lawyers, the judicial system, the police, first responders. It's universal. So to encourage other survivors to seek justice, to sensitize those systems that are supposed to serve them. And then I think that for me, the reason I made the film was to have an impact on masculinity. And so it's, how do we use this film? How do we use the story of this incredible father, this farmer in India who stood by his daughter? And how do we encourage other men and other boys, to do the same, to understand that, um, this is not about women. It's not a women's rights issue. It's a human rights issue, and they also should be advocating for it. They also should be fighting for it.
Yeah. And I love that her father was so supportive because, especially again, going back to the Asian community thing, like it's like you brought shame on the family and it becomes that. But also talking about that, like, you're filming, talking about the masculinity of it all, you're filming during the trial. Um, do you think that impacted the outcome
Yes.
by that pressure of like, this is a crew, this is a camera crew, this is a
Yeah.
documentary that we're making? Talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Undoubtedly. I mean, I would say for sure. I mean, it's a as soon as you turn a camera on anywhere, when you're a documentary filmmaker, as soon as you turn a camera on, you're affecting something. You're you're altering a reality in a way, right? It's just kind of it's inherent in the form, I think. I think in this particular case, it was so clear, right? It was very, very clear that we were a part of the story, that we were impacting the story. I mean, you could, obviously, right? I mean, the villagers basically said, "Get out of our village," right? Get out of our community. I think in terms, and interestingly enough, it's such a good point that you raised this, but it was actually also one of the reasons that Ranjit wanted us to continue filming in spite of the death threats that he faced, was because he understood, as somebody from a low caste person who was poor, who was impoverished, that what we gave him was legitimacy. We ensured that at court his case was taken seriously. We also ensured a certain kind of, as much as possible, certain kind of legal protocols were followed, right? Like, for example, this case, because it was a young girl, it was a minor. It should have actually only taken 6 months. That was what it should have been. It took 14. Now, had we not been following, who knows how long it could have taken, right? Or whether bribes would have been paid, whether people would have succumbed to kind of pressure, right? There were all sorts of things happen in terms of the legal system there. So we definitely ensured legitimacy. We definitely ensured that his case was taken seriously. In terms of the actual outcome, in terms of the sentence, no, no. And I did speak to a lot of people about that because I was very aware of that. And I think what happened was, at the time, there was another incident that had just taken place, which was really, really brutal, really, really horrific. And I think, it was like another Delhi gang rape, right? So that was in the air. I think that was definitely part of consciousness at the time. So I think that's why the sentence was what it was. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, please seek out To Kill a Tiger. It is an incredible, powerful, important documentary. Nisha, thank you so much for that conversation, and thank you to everybody for tuning in to Variety FYC Fest, the Shortlist. Stay tuned for our next conversation.